Okay, I want to show of hands. Who here has ever competed in anything in their life? I better see every hand up. We've all done it, right? We've all competed for something at some point. It could have been a dance, a recital, a competition, a game, a speech. We have competed, and it's required training. We have to train. I'm no different than anybody else. I've trained for a lot of things in my life, but one of the stories that stick out more is in 2015, I was training for a mixed martial arts tournament. I had always loved the sport, and I realized that this was the time to finally compete. It was now or never, because I had met my now wife, then girlfriend, and she was already starting to raise problems about it. You know what I mean? Like, I realized the end is near, and freedoms are going to start disappearing. So, buy the motorcycle and compete in the fighting tournament now. But I wanted to do it so bad, and so I did it. I signed up for it, and from the moment I signed up, I began a very strict training regimen. I would wake up Monday through Friday at 5:30 in the morning to be at practice by 6. I practiced from 6 to 8, Monday to Friday, and let me just explain something really quickly. When you compete in any sort of combat sport, getting hit, getting kicked, that just comes with the territory. And while we love the sport, if anybody ever tells you they like getting hit or getting kicked, they're lying to you. It doesn't feel good. But what feels even worse than getting hit or getting kicked is getting hit or getting kicked at 6 o'clock in the morning. Like, at that time, the sun's not even up, and you're just getting punched. There's nothing fun about that. But I wanted to compete so badly that I was willing to do whatever it took to get there. I wanted to succeed. And so I trained. Not only did I train, but I had to monitor my appetite very carefully. Not my appetite, what I actually ate. I was trying to lose weight. I needed to lose 17 pounds to compete. And so I couldn't eat whatever I wanted. I had to go to bed earlier because I was waking up much earlier. I had to spend 45 minutes a day just stretching, trying to develop flexibility and dexterity in my arms and legs. And all of this kind of culminated in the day before the tournament. The day before the tournament was weigh-in day. And on weigh-in day, I was still 10 pounds too heavy to fight in the class that I wanted to. And so I don't know if we have any wrestlers in here. If you haven't wrestled before, you may not know what losing 10 pounds in a day looks like. But it looks like putting trash bags all over your body, putting a sweatshirt and sweatpants over that, and then anything else if you can find it, and going and doing burpees in a sauna until you think you're going to pass out, going from there to a stationary bike and biking while you let your body cool down, and repeating that process until you lose the weight you want to lose. It's not fun, but that's how big of a deal this was to me. I wanted to do it so bad. And I also learned an important life lesson in this: humility. Because my wife didn't want me to do it. She's like, listen, people get hurt. You're going to be hitting each other. I'm like, babe, nobody gets seriously hurt in these things. Like, come on. Yeah, every now and then, but no. I left that tournament with a dislocated shoulder, a torn labrum, and a chipped shoulder socket. And she was there to graciously tell me I told you so. But as I was thinking about this, I was thinking, why do we train? What do we train for? What is the underlying root of training? And I think we do it for several reasons. I think that we train, firstly, for the things that we love. The things that we're passionate about, we train for. We train for things when the stakes are high. When failure is not an option, we train. When we can't afford to lose, we train. And it's important. It's a very popular characteristic or trait in the world around us, but this is also true of us spiritually. And so I want to ask you today as we go through this, I want you to consider this question. What are you training for? Well, how's everybody doing today? You guys excited to be here? Anybody get caught by the rain? I had no idea that was coming. I walked out of the last service and I was like, wow, check that out. That's nice. My name is Ronnie, and I'm on staff here at Grace. I'm so excited to be here. We're starting a brand new series today. So if you're here for the first time, welcome, and I want to thank you for checking us out. I know that can be intimidating to go into a new place, especially a new church, and so I commend your bravery, and I thank you for giving us a chance. If you've been here for years, welcome back. I'm glad you're still here. If you're checking us out online or on Facebook Live, we thank you for being here. And if you're here today and you say, I'm here, but it's because I have to be here. You know, maybe you're staying with family and they're like, we're not buying you lunch unless you go to church with us. You don't believe in this whole God thing. That's cool. We're glad that you're here. We're stoked that you're here. And this is a perfect time to be here because we're starting a new series, so you're not jumping in the middle anywhere. But even if you don't believe what we believe about God, there's a lot that you can get out of our talk today. And so I would challenge you, if that's you, to pay attention, to take notes, because there's a lot of information that we're going to cover, a lot of wisdom, and it's not mine. Before we get into this message, will you pray with me? Lord Jesus, we thank you for today, God. We thank you for this city. We thank you for the people in this city. We thank you for your love, Lord, and for your goodness. We thank you for all that you've done for us. And I pray that as we spend this time together today, that you would help me to get out of the way, Lord. I pray that you would speak to these people and that we would all leave today having learned something new about you. We love you. We give you the glory. And it's in your name that we pray. And all the people said, Amen. If you get nothing else out of this message, I want to tell you what our whole point of this is. Our whole idea behind this entire series is to get every single one of you plugged in. We want you to start training. Andy Stanley is a very popular pastor in Georgia. He has a massive church, and he's got a lot of wisdom about a lot of things. And in studying for this message, I came across a quote from him that really stuck with me. And he said that spiritual maturity is not synonymous with Bible knowledge. It's synonymous with Bible application. And that's not just true spiritually. That's true of anything in life, isn't it? I can know that my body needs water to survive, and I can know that I'm thirsty, but if that doesn't translate to real-world application, what's going to happen? I'm going to die because it does nothing. Just knowing something does nothing for anybody. And as you come here today, we want you to be learning, but we also want you to be applying. So as we look through this today, I want to challenge you to see how you can begin to apply these things in your life. And at the very end, we're going to go over a couple of ways that we want to provide to you in case you choose that. So don't try, train. What's the difference? There's probably a lot of ways to qualify that, but I found a quote from a Navy SEAL, and his name's Eric Davis. I love the way that he characterizes this. He says, trying is one half step more than just really wanting something. It's a toe dipped in the pool, a nibble of broccoli, or the purchasing of a lottery ticket. When we try something, we're actually just hoping to get lucky and receive the benefit without paying the price. You see, when we trying is working from within our existing capabilities. And this can get us somewhere because we've all been given talents and abilities and gifts, right? And if we find that, that'll get us somewhere, but it will never get us as far as training. Because training takes those abilities and it develops them through sustained effort, practice, and discipline. You see, trying is what my wife did with dinner last night. Oh, training is what I want her to do. I'm just kidding. Anybody have a couch I can sleep on? No, my wife is an amazing cook, and she knows she's an amazing cook. I know she's an amazing cook, and the 15 pounds that I've gained in 5 months of marriage know she's an amazing cook. But there's a difference here between trying and training, working from within ourselves and developing ourselves. How many people here today, by a show of hands, could wake up tomorrow and run a marathon? I see one or two. Okay, how many people in here, if your life depended on it, could wake up tomorrow and run 26.3 miles? Like, you may finish with toenails falling off and swollen knees, but you'd do it. Okay, so there's some more of us. How many of us think that a year from today, if we trained for a year, we could run a marathon? Almost all of us. That's because training allows us to go further than previously. It helps us to dig deeper, to push past. Training takes us to the next level. What are you training for? Turn to the person next to you and ask, what are you training for? Ready, go. It's important to know what we're training for, because what we are training for directs where we're going. We train for what we're passionate about. That directs the direction of our life. It's interesting to know that Paul, the author of 1 Corinthians, he trained extensively. Not physically for a sport, but he trained for almost half of his life. You see, Paul, for almost half of his life, was a Pharisee. And the Pharisees were a sect of Judaism, and they were often not portrayed positively in the Bible. They were always going to bat with Jesus and raising problems, but what could be said about the Pharisees is they were academic. They devoted themselves to memorizing Scripture, to reading Scripture, to memorizing all the extra rules that they made up for themselves. They were dedicated to learning this stuff. And Paul was one of them. And this is one of the things that made Paul's ministry so effective after he met Jesus, because he trained with the Pharisees. He was one of the best ones. And so when he met Jesus and he switched his focus, he was then able to take the message of Jesus toe to toe with these scholars and academics and out-debate them. It was because of his training that he succeeded. He understood the importance, the goal, the end in sight, and he wasn't going to let it go. He wasn't just going to try. When we train, it does three things for us. It increases our confidence, it increases our competence, and it increases our capacity. And I'll explain what those are. The first thing that training does is it gives us confidence, right? Confidence is the mental assurance that you can do what you can do. If you're training to backflip and you do it 100 times, you have confidence in that. You know that when you try to backflip, you're going to backflip. But that's not all that training does for us. Training also gives us competence. And competence here is simply the ability to actually do that thing and to do it well. I don't know if you've ever seen what it looks like when people think they have both these things, but they really just have the first one. It usually results in physical injury. For me, I was confident that I could do a double front flip off a trampoline into a pool. The competence wasn't there. Turned into a front flip and a half onto my face into a pool. And it wasn't a fun experience. But when we train, it builds confidence and it builds competence. The third thing that it does is it increases our capacity to do that thing over and over and over and over again, consistently. Training gives us the mental assurance, the ability to do it well, and the ability to do it consistently. And when people see that, it does something to them. It creates the opportunity for influence. Influence is interesting because we're all subject to it, and we all have it over others, right? We are all influenced by people, and we all influence others. Even in my first story, when I talked about the MMA competition, the only reason that I did that was because as a 14-year-old boy coming to this church, I met Pastor Scott Laughlin, and he was really into the fighting scene. And I looked at him and I was like, this guy is cool. I want to do what he does. And that created a passion within me that's continued into my adult life. That was influence. But influence is interesting because influence is a matter of capital. You see, like capital, influence can and has to be earned. It can be spent, it can be invested, but it can also be wasted. How do you use your influence capital? And this is an important question, because if you're here today and you do identify as a Jesus follower, as a Christian, that means that you believe that after death there's a life with Jesus, there's a life with God, and there's a life without. And the person to your left and the person to your right will have to make that decision. And when you go home, your family and your friends and everybody that you know will have to make that decision. And you have the opportunity to influence the outcome of that decision. All too often, we waste our influence capital. We spend it on things like controversial posts on social media. We spend it on sharing our political views with people who don't really care and people who we're not even trying to really convince. We waste our influence capital, and then we don't have it to spend on the things that are truthfully important. How will you use your influence capital? Let's take a look at how Paul says he used his and how he thinks we should use ours. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 19 says, "For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them." This is interesting. If you're wondering what this idea of freedom is, he's talking about the new covenant. Before Jesus came around, there was the Mosaic Law. This was the rule of Judaism, and it kept people in order. And when Jesus came, he said, you no longer need all of these laws because you're under grace now. And so that's also called the law of liberty. Paul is simply saying, because of Jesus, we are no longer under Mosaic law, but we are free. However, he's very clear about what he does with that freedom. "For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them." How are you going to use your freedom? Will you use it selfishly, or will you use it as a servant? You see, selfish says, I'm free and you're free, so you do you, I'm going to do me. We're good here. I'm not going to worry about you. I don't want you to worry about me. I'm on my island, you're on yours. Let's keep it that way. It's a siloed kind of thinking, a siloed lifestyle. The servant's heart says, because I love you, because you're important to me, I will sacrifice my rights, my freedom for your health and your well-being. It's the law of liberty, but the law of liberty is trumped by the law of love. In John 15:12, one of the last things that Jesus says to the disciples before he goes to the cross is, love one another as I have loved you. We're all familiar with the golden rule, right? Love others as you love yourself. Jesus took it a step further. Right before he goes, he's like, check this out, level up, ready, go. Love one another as I have loved you. During worship today, we took communion, and we do that in remembrance of the sacrifice of Jesus. That's what this love was like. This was a love that went to a bloody death for people who oftentimes didn't appreciate him, who mocked him, who scorned him, who didn't even know what he had done, didn't believe in what he was trying to tell people. But he said, I don't care, because maybe someday you will. And when you do, it's here for you. All you have to do is accept it. And that's what Paul's saying is, although we're free, we submit ourselves to the law of love in order that we may win more of them. Let's continue on, verses 20 through 22. Paul speaking still, and he says, to the Jews I became a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law, I became as one under the law, though not myself being under the law. He's talking here about that Mosaic law. That I might win those under the law. To those outside the law, I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. This last verse, verse 22, is really interesting, because what Paul's saying is, to the weak I became weak. And we're going to study this right now, because you need to understand the tenses that this is written in. We're going to get into some Greek grammar, so hold on. This first phrase here, I became weak, is written in the aorist tense in Greek. The aorist tense in Greek is similar to our simple past tense. I drove the car. I folded the shirt. I did the laundry. I swept the house. Whatever it may be. It points to a point in time. It's punctiliar, which means that it refers to a point in time, but not necessarily the span of time. Because you can say, I folded the shirt. You can also say, I went to college. One takes a minute. The other takes 4 years. And some of you are 6 years and still going. But I'm not getting into that today. It just refers to a point in time. But the second phrase, I have become all things, is not written in the aorist tense. It's written in the perfect tense. And the perfect tense is a little more descriptive. The perfect tense describes the process of an action coming into its culmination. The action is finished. And now that the action is finished, the effects of that action are now fully in existence. And so get what Paul's saying here. He's saying, I became weak. Aorist tense, I did it in the past. We don't know how long it took, how many times he did it. We just know it's been done in the past. But then he goes on and says, I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. And this is written in the present tense. He's saying that this is a process that I've done. I have, through training, through practicing it over and over and over again, have been able to master becoming all things to all people. And the effect of that is that he might be able to save some. And so you might be asking, well, Paul's being fake, isn't he? He says to the weak, he's weak. To those outside the law, he's outside the law. To those under the law, he's under the law, but he's not really under the law. He's just kind of like being whatever people want him to be. It's disingenuous, right? That's not what he's saying. Paul, like all of us, had lived quite a bit of life at this time. I'll put it to you this way. I love country music, and I have a lot of friends who love country music. And when I'm with my friends who love country music, you know what we do? We listen to country music. I also have friends who listen to reggae, and I enjoy reggae. When I'm with my friends who listen to reggae, I don't listen to country music. And I'm not being disingenuous, I'm just connecting with them on what we have in common. And this is exactly what Paul's doing. Paul has lived a lot of life, and he is meeting these people where he's been and where they are so that he can connect with them, create meaning, all for the purpose of sharing the news of Jesus. It's important to note that all of this is in the context of chapter 8. In chapter 8, Paul's talking about food offered to idols and basically how, because they're under the law of liberty, it's okay to do now. He said, idols don't really exist, so the piece of wood's not going to care if you eat the sandwich that was sacrificed to it. Like, go for it. But be careful who you do it around. Because if you're with somebody who has a sensibility about that, and you cause that person to question or to doubt or to stumble, that's on you. He says, be careful that this newfound freedom does not become a stumbling block to others. And this is something, again, that we all realize innately. If you're having friends over to your house, and one of those friends is a recovering alcoholic, the Bible doesn't forbid drinking, but the loving thing to do is to remove that alcohol from sight, right? Because you don't want your friend to walk in there and be tempted and to struggle and to possibly relapse. And Paul says, if you don't put that away, and he does, that's on you. Because we've been given liberty, but we've also been charged to love. What are you training for? Understand that he does all of this for the sake of the gospel, that he might win some. He continues in verse 23 and says, I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings. He's doing it for something bigger than him, right? He's sacrificing his freedom for something bigger than him. And this is something that we all understand, something that we're familiar with. Even if you're here today and you say, I don't believe all this stuff about God. I'm not buying it. You still know what it's like to sacrifice some of your freedoms in pursuit of something bigger than yourself, right? Maybe it's your career, your job, something you could never build in one lifetime. And yet, you've bought into their mission statement, you bought into their vision, and so you commit yourself, your time, your influence, your money, your effort, because it's something bigger than you. Maybe it's something noble like ending world hunger or thirst. Maybe it's curing disease. Whatever it is, we're all familiar with dedicating ourselves, sacrificing our freedoms for something bigger than us. And if you're here today and you identify as a follower of Jesus, it's very simple. It's for the progress of the gospel. Because we believe that there's a God who loved us so much that he was willing to go to a bloody death for us in order that we might have relationship with him. That's the whole purpose of the Bible. And all he wants us to do now is to share that with others. But we have to train. It's not good enough to try. 1 Corinthians 6:20 says, "You were bought with a price, so glorify God with your body." We are not our own. We have been bought for a price, and we have been commissioned for a purpose. Are you living that out? Are you training for that end? It's really cool. Continuing, Paul compares this to a race. He wants to paint a vivid picture here, and he says, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it." He's saying, nobody trains for second place, right? Nobody is like, "Oh man, I got to get this training in because I want bronze. Gold's too shiny." Nobody wants that. We train to win. And that's what Paul's saying to do. He said, you need to train to win. And the win here is winning people for Jesus. Remember, he says in 23, he does it all for the sake of the gospel. That is the win. He continues on in verse 25. He says, every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. Self-control here has the notion of total control. Paul's talking about locking it down, committing, training vigorously, and he's going to get even more in depth into it. But he says that while others do it to receive an imperishable wreath, he's comparing it to the Olympians, the Athenians, and how they would receive a wreath, but that wreath would ultimately wither. It would die, it would decay. And he's saying that we do it for an eternal reward in heaven. He continues on, he says, so I do not run aimlessly, I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. This is really vivid imagery. I want you to understand this. He says, I do not run aimlessly, I do not box as one beating the air. What he's saying is, I'm not going to be a runner who just jogs around the neighborhood for the rest of his life. I'm not going to be a boxer who never steps into the ring and only trains on the bag or with his hands. He's saying, I am training with the vigor and the commitment of a professional athlete. That's how committed I am to this. And he gets even more vivid. He says, but I discipline my body. The Greek for discipline here is hupopiazo, and it means to strike under the eye, to get hit in the face. He's talking about hitting himself, and he's not talking about it literally, but he's saying, I will beat my body into submission if that's what it takes. And he even goes further. He says, and keep it under control. The word here is duologogeo, and it means to lead into slavery. I will beat my body into submission and lead it to slavery because that's how important the outcome is to me. That's how important every one of them are to him. That's how important every one of you are to him. He's willing to train that way for it, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. Disqualified simply means to be unworthy to compete. We become that way when we refuse to be all things to all men. When we refuse to meet others where they're at, when we refuse to love others and put their sensibilities before our rights, we become disqualified to compete in the race that God has called us to. What are you training for? What are we training for? One of the ways that we can know we're training, one of the most telling ways, is when you can point to the calendar and say, there, that's when I'm training. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 6 to 8. And this is true of our spiritual lives. Can you do that for yourself? Can you say on the calendar, this is the time that I've boxed out to train in my spiritual life? And if not, I would encourage you to do it because it matters. We as a church, we as Grace, here in North Park and out at our East Campus, we train to impact the world. That is our calling. And I'll explain that in a minute, but I want you to understand something. As Paul writes to the Corinthians here, he's telling a story. He's telling his story, right? He's able to tell a positive story because of the work that he put in prior to it. Because he trained, he was successful. And that allowed him to tell a story about how he became all things to all men. We all have a lot of stories, and we'll continue to gain more and more stories for the rest of our lives. But I want to ask each and every one of you a question, and I want you to take this home today and mull over it. Whether or not you believe in God, what is the story you want to tell on your last day on earth? What do you want your life story to look like? With all of your beliefs, with your work, with your family, with your passions, with your hobbies, what does that look like to each and every one of you? And are you training for your story? Are you training for the story that God's called you to? Have you blocked out time for it? That's something that I certainly have to work on. I am not excused from this, and I'm challenging all of us today as we leave here to take that challenge. There's several ways that we've set up here at Grace for people to be able to train. To point to the calendar and say, hey, there's time blocked out for this. And it's awesome because you guys are already doing the first one. The first one is to attend a weekly worship service. So you guys are good. Point to that on the calendar. Sunday, boom, 11 o'clock, we're training. But you don't even know what that does for you. You know what it does for you. You don't know what it does for other people. You have no idea how just your presence here can impact others. Whether it's a hello, a handshake, a hug. What may be a small interaction to you can be hugely important to somebody in need of that. The second way that we have for you to be able to get plugged in here, to be able to train, is to serve on a ministry team. As you came in today, you might have had somebody hand you a program. Might have had an usher seat you. You might have seen somebody at the information booth, somebody making coffee. These are all volunteers. Everybody up on stage who was worshiping earlier, volunteers. We have a kids ministry. If you're passionate about being with kids, get plugged in. Start training. Because it matters. Because when eternity is concerned, trying is not good enough. The third way that you can train is financially. And I know that this is something that is controversial. It's hard for us, but the Bible is clear that giving is a hallmark of a transformed life. And that's because this is one of those things that we hold on to the tightest. Our money. We know what gas prices look like in San Diego. We barely make enough to get by as it is. But how powerful then to take that thing that runs so much of our life and to give that back to God, to train ourselves into submission through giving. The fourth is joining a Connect group. We're beginning to start our Connect group season here soon, and this allows you to get close in a way that you never could here on Sunday. Here we meet for an hour and a half. If Pastor Tim is preaching, we meet for 2 hours. But anybody can hold up a facade for an hour and 10 minutes. But when we get into community, when we meet with each other weekly and get to build relationships and become vulnerable, we grow with one another. We train. We build ourselves and we build each other. And the last way is to join an outreach team. We serve hungry and homeless people here every week. We have ministry partners in Guatemala, in Thailand, in Mexico. Get plugged in. When you serve somebody in need like that, you're powerfully changing their life, but I promise you, it does more for you than it does for them because we have been created and called to serve and to love. Are you training for the story you want to tell? I know that there's some of us in here today who say, Ronnie, I don't believe in all that. It's a cool story, but I know that there's also some of us in here today who are questioning, who say, I don't know what I believe, but I know that I'm not training for the story that I want to tell. If that's you and you're here today, I want you to pretend that it's just you and me in the room right now. Pretend that you have told me everything about your life, everything that you've ever done, the good, the noble, the generous, the kind, the bad, the ugly, the cruel, the embarrassing, everything. And when you finish, I look at you and I say, yeah, and God knows, and he loves you. And he wants nothing more than a relationship with you. And all you have to do to make that happen is to accept it.